There's a clay tablet sitting in a museum storage archive, not on display, not digitized for public access, not discussed in mainstream academic circles, that describes, in fragmented but unmistakable language, the final century of a civilization, not a metaphor, not allegory, a literal accounting of how a world ends. The tablet was excavated from the ruins of ancient Sumer, the world's first known civilization, which flourished in what is now southern Iraq between 4500 and 1900 BCE. And what is written on it has never been adequately explained. The Sumerians were not primitive. That needs to be stated clearly and without apology, because the reflex of modern civilization, educated, technological, self-congratulatory modern civilization, is to absorb ancient knowledge through a filter of condescension, to treat every ancient inscription as primitive groping toward truths that only we, with our instruments and universities and peer-reviewed journals, have finally grasped. That reflex is precisely what this tablet is about. The Sumerians invented the wheel, the written language, mathematics, astronomy, the first legal codes, the first schools, the first libraries. They mapped the heavens with precision that modern astronomers have confirmed. They recorded observations of planetary cycles that we are still only beginning to fully interpret. They built cities of 200,000 people when the rest of the world was living in scattered agricultural villages. They were not groping. They knew things. And some of what they knew they chose to write down in clay, which does not burn, which does not rot, which does not conveniently disappear when its contents become inconvenient to the civilization that succeeds them. Clay is patient. Clay waits. That is what clay does. The tablet in question, known to scholars who acknowledge it as part of the Eridu Genesis corpus, a collection of Sumerian flood and creation narratives, contains a section that departs sharply from the standard mythological framework, where the rest of the corpus deals with gods creating humans from clay, with flood myths that clearly predate the biblical account of Noah by thousands of years, and with lists of antediluvian kings who supposedly ruled for tens of thousands of years. This section becomes something different. It becomes a countdown. It becomes a sequence. It becomes something that reads less like a story about the past and more like a description of a mechanism that is already in motion. The countdown is built around a concept the Sumerians called the Me, pronounced May, which was their word for the divine decrees that governed civilization itself. Not laws, not customs, the actual operational instructions of human society. The Sumerians believed the Me were physical objects, like tablets or cylinders that had been handed down from the gods. They governed everything: kingship, priesthood, music, the descent into the underworld, truth, falsehood, the craft of the scribe, the craft of the metalworker, the knowledge of war, the knowledge of peace, the concept of justice, the concept of beauty, the understanding of mathematics, the perception of time, the bonds between parents and children, the rituals that connected the living to the dead, the ceremonies that marked the transition from one phase of life to another. The Me were, in modern terms, the source code of civilization. Not any one civilization, civilization itself. And the tablet describes, with a precision that should have attracted far more scholarly attention than it has received, what happens when the Me begin to fail. It does not use the word fail. The Sumerian text uses a construction that translates most literally as the Me are taken back, as if the instructions of civilization are being reclaimed by whatever force originally issued them. Not destroyed, not corrupted, taken back, withdrawn. The images of alone being called in, of something that was always temporary, always conditional, always subject to recall at the discretion of a creditor who has decided the terms have been violated or the period has simply expired. And the tablet describes the sequence of withdrawal, not all at once, one by one, in a specific order. The order matters. The sequence is not random. It follows an internal logic that, once you see it, is profoundly difficult to unsee. The first Me to be taken back, according to the text, is what translates as the descent of kingship from heaven. In modern language, legitimate governance. The Sumerians understood governance as something more than political organization. They understood it as a sacred function, a relationship between the human realm and a larger ordering principle, expressed through the figure of the king or ruler who was supposed to embody that principle, to channel it downward into society, to be its human vessel. When this Me is withdrawn, the text says, rulers will no longer rule from authority, but from force alone. The people will know the difference. They will feel it in the quality of the governance itself. Governance becomes performance. Laws become theater. Proclamations multiply while actual function collapses. Those in power will speak the vocabulary of justice while embodying its opposite, and the population will lack the language to articulate what has been lost, only the sensation of its absence, a persistent unease, a background noise of wrongness that no official communication can silence, because the official communication is itself part of the wrongness. The second Me to be withdrawn is what the tablet calls the true word. This is not simply truth versus lies. The Sumerians had a more sophisticated concept, the idea that language itself carries a binding force, that spoken agreements, oaths, and declarations have structural weight in the fabric of reality. When the true word is taken back, words become untethered from their consequences. A man can say one thing and do another, with no cost to his standing. Agreements dissolve, promises become noise, oaths become performance. The tablet uses a striking phrase here, translated approximately as, "Words will travel faster than truth can follow," which scholars who encounter it tend to note carefully and then quickly move past. The implication is almost too precise to be comfortable. A world in which information velocity exceeds the capacity to verify, in which the sheer volume of competing claims makes the identification of truth functionally impossible for ordinary people, in which the tools designed to spread communication become the primary instruments of confusion. A world that does not merely feel familiar, but is the world in which these words are being read. The third withdrawal is what translates as the ordering of the waters. This is not metaphorical. The Sumerians built their entire civilization on irrigation, the controlled movement of water from the Tigris and Euphrates into the agricultural networks that fed millions. The emi of water ordering was the principle that water could be made to serve human needs in a structured, predictable way. When this emi is taken back, the text does not describe flooding, drought, or natural disaster as such. It describes something subtler and more disturbing. A situation where water becomes unpredictable in its behavior, where it arrives in places and times that disrupt rather than sustain, where the systems built to contain and direct it begin to fail not through external catastrophe, but through internal incoherence, as if the logic that allowed water to be ordered is simply withdrawn from the world, and the water returns to a state of being that obeys something other than human need. Read that against the backdrop of the 21st century, its water table depletion, its catastrophic floods followed by record droughts, its aging dam infrastructure failing across 3 continents simultaneously, its agricultural aquifers being emptied faster than any rainfall can refill them, and then decide whether the Sumerians were speaking in metaphor. Then the 4th NMI, then the 5th. The tablet lists 17 ME in total, withdrawn in sequence across what it describes as a span of generations. The precise Sumerian term has been translated variously as the span of a great man's life multiplied, which some researchers interpret as a period of roughly 100 years, not 1 century as a round number, 100 years as a structural unit, the time required for the full sequence of withdrawals to complete, for the source code to be fully retracted, for the system to reach the condition the tablet calls the AN, KI threshold. The Sumerians were precise people. When they named a duration, they named it with reason. Among the withdrawals that follow the first 3, the tablet describes the recession of what it calls the craft of assembly, which scholars interpret as the capacity for collective human organization, the ability to coordinate effort across large groups toward shared purpose without the intervention of coercion. When this ME is taken, the text says, humans will be unable to act together even when they can see the danger coming. They will debate endlessly, form committees, produce documents, and take no action that matters at the scale that matters. Another withdrawal named in the text is the bond between generations, the transmission of essential knowledge from those who hold it to those who need it. When this is taken, the accumulated wisdom of a civilization stops moving forward and begins to evaporate. Each generation must relearn what the previous one already knew, and the pace of relearning falls behind the pace at which the world is changing. The gap between what is known and what needs to be known opens steadily, silently, until it is uncrossable. What happens at the end of the full sequence is where the tablet becomes most debated, most suppressed, and most significant. The final passage, the section that has caused the most controversy, the most deliberate shelving, describes what the Sumerians called the AN, KI event. AN is their word for sky, for heaven, for the realm above. KI is their word for earth. The AN, KI event is, in the most literal translation available, the moment when sky and earth renegotiate their relationship, the moment when the terms of the compact between the above and the below are rewritten. Not the end of everything. The end of the current arrangement, the end of the version of reality that the current set of ME had made possible. What comes after is not described in terms of destruction. It is described in terms of transformation so complete that the civilization that existed before the AN, KI event would not be able to recognize what follows as the same world. The Sumerian scholar Thorkild Jacobsen, working in the mid-20th century, translated a version of this passage as describing a cosmic reset, a point at which the conditions that had made civilization possible were fundamentally altered, not destroyed, altered, as if the operating parameters of the physical world, or of human perception of the physical world, were adjusted from outside the system. His translation was disputed. His colleagues suggested he had been too liberal with the source material, that the text was damaged in critical places, that the gaps he had filled were filled with inference rather than evidence. Jacobson died in 1993. His disputed translation was never formally refuted. It was simply not discussed. That is how the academic establishment handles conclusions it cannot absorb. Not refutation, which requires engagement, which requires accounting for the evidence on the other side, but silence, which requires nothing and leaves no record of the argument that was avoided. Here is what makes this specific tablet different from the thousands of other Sumerian texts that deal in cosmic timelines and divine interventions. Most Sumerian mythological texts describe the past, the Eridu Genesis, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Atrahasis. They are accounts of things that already happened, the Great Flood, the creation, the descent of kingship. This tablet is written in a tense that Sumerian scholars identify as the prophetic declarative, a grammatical construction that the Sumerians used specifically for things that had not yet occurred, but were considered structurally certain to occur. It is not the tense of myth. It is the tense of schedule. The difference is structural, and it is written into the grammar itself. Sumerian grammar is not ambiguous on this point. The political scientist Peter Turchin, working entirely within the framework of mainstream Western political theory, developed what he called cliodynamics, the mathematical modeling of historical cycles. His models, based on analysis of thousands of years of historical data across dozens of civilizations on multiple continents, consistently identify a pattern, a period during which elite overproduction, declining social trust, governmental dysfunction, and resource misallocation compound each other in a feedback loop that terminates in what he calls a secular crisis. His models place the current trajectory of Western civilization inside that terminal phase, beginning approximately in the first decade of the 21st century. He did not specify a precise duration for the terminal phase, but his data implied one, and it implied a scale of time that maps uncomfortably well onto the 100 years of the Sumerian countdown. He never cited the Sumerian tablet. He does not know it exists, but the sequence he describes, governance becoming performance, then language becoming untethered from consequence, then the systems of resource management beginning to malfunction, then the capacity for collective action dissolving, then the transmission of knowledge between generations breaking down, is a restatement of the ME withdrawal sequence in the language of modern political science. Two entirely separate methodologies, separated by 4,000 years, arriving at the same structural description of the same process through completely different means. The 17th ME, the last to be withdrawn before the ANKI event, is the one that has attracted the most attention from those who study this text outside the constraints of academic convention. It is translated as the knowledge of above and below. The Sumerians meant by this a specific perceptual capability, the ability to read the world as a text, to perceive events as carrying meaning rather than as random noise, to understand that what happens in the material world is connected to larger patterns of cause and structure that are real even when invisible, the capacity to see the shape of the process you are inside. When the 17th ME is withdrawn, the text says, humans will no longer be able to read the world. They will see events as isolated incidents rather than as components of a pattern. They will watch the sequence of withdrawals unfold and interpret each stage as the product of bad luck or mismanagement or the failures of specific individuals rather than as the expression of a structural process that has a shape, a direction, a destination. The tablet says, and this is the passage that researchers who encounter it tend to find most unsettling, that the withdrawal of the 17th ME is itself invisible to those it affects. They will not know it has been taken. They will believe themselves to be the most informed, the most perceptive, the most data-rich civilization in history, and they will be reading nothing. The ocean of information will feel like comprehension. The speed of communication will feel like understanding. The access to endless data will feel like wisdom. None of it will be those things. What triggers the ANKI event? The tablet is damaged at exactly this point. The most reconstructed reading, worked from parallel texts in the Sumerian corpus, suggests it is not a meteor, not a flood, not a war, not a plague, not any single catastrophe with a single cause and a single moment of impact. The trigger appears to be described as a convergence, a moment when multiple withdrawn ME reach a critical threshold simultaneously, when the absence of enough structural principles reaches a point where the system can no longer sustain itself through any form of adaptation, compensation, or workaround. Not any one failure, the compounding of absences, the accumulation of what is no longer there. The system does not break at a single point. It dissolves across all its structural joints at once, and the dissolution, when it comes, is so complete that those inside it cannot distinguish it from the world, simply continuing as it always has. Only something is different. Something has shifted at a level below the threshold of ordinary perception. And what comes next is not what the models predicted. There is a fragment preserved in a separate tablet from the same excavation site at Eridu that some researchers believe is a continuation of the same text. It describes the period immediately before the AN Ki event as a time of extraordinary technological achievement alongside extraordinary perceptual blindness, two conditions that exist in the same moment, in the same civilization, among the same people who cannot see that these two things are in relationship to each other, that the achievement is feeding the blindness. The Sumerians use a word for technology that has been translated as the making of things that move without breath, mechanisms, automata, constructs that function without life force. The fragment says that in the final generation before the AN Ki event, humans will perfect the making of things that move without breath. They will teach these things to speak, and they will use these speaking, breathless things to make the noise louder, to accelerate the speed at which words travel without truth following, to multiply beyond any human capacity to track the distance between what is said and what is real, to replace the 17th ME with its perfect simulation, a tool that looks like the knowledge of above and below, that can reproduce its surface in infinite variation, but that contains none of its substance. The cuneiform does not use a word that maps precisely to artificial intelligence. It does not have to. The description maps itself. What the Sumerian tablets describe, taken in their full sequence, is not prophecy in the sense most people use that word. It is not a prediction made by someone who glimpsed the future through mystical vision. It is a structural account, a description of how civilizations behave when they enter a specific terminal phase, written by people who believed they had received documentation of this phase from a previous cycle, who understood the Great Flood not as a meteorological event, but as the terminus of a full civilizational sequence, complete with its own ME withdrawals, its own period of technological achievement alongside perceptual blindness, its own AN Ki event, and who chose, in the aftermath of that terminus, to write down what they knew so that whoever came next might recognize it when it came for them. That is the choice that distinguishes this tablet from mythology. Mythology explains the past to justify the present. This tablet explains the sequence to warn the future. The tense is prophetic declarative because it was written not for the Sumerians. It was written for whoever found themselves inside the sequence and still retained enough of the 17th ME to understand what they were reading. The tablet sits in a storage archive. Most of it remains untranslated. The sequence continues, not because of the tablet. The tablet is just the record. The sequence continues because that is what sequences do. What the Sumerians could not tell us, what no record from any civilization has ever been able to tell the civilization that finds the record, is whether the ANKI event is an ending or a threshold, whether what comes after is absence or something that does not yet have a name in any language that currently exists, whether the renegotiation between sky and earth produces a world that is recognizable to human perception or a world that requires a new set of ME to operate, a new source code, a new set of instructions for what comes next, whether the tablet itself is one of those instructions. They left it in the clay. They pressed the sequence into wet clay and let it harden into something that would outlast them by 4,000 years and counting. They left the question open. Whether that was mercy or precision is the one thing the cuneiform does not say. But there is a word in the tablet's final line, a word that appears only once after the AN-Ki event is described, after the sequence has run its course, that no translator has managed to render into any modern language with full confidence. Scholars have proposed translations. Each one sounds less like an ending than like an instruction. Each one sounds in ways that resist full articulation, like the beginning of something that has not yet arrived, like a door, not a wall, like a question addressed to a reader the Sumerians could not see, but somehow, in the grammar of the prophetic declarative, were writing toward, a reader who exists now, who is reading now, and who is left as every reader of this tablet has been left, with the task of deciding what the word means, what it demands, and whether there is still time.